It gives me great pleasure to introduce the Honourable Tony Burke, Minister for the Arts and Minister for the Employment and Workplace Relations. Please make welcome Minister to the stage.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Ambassador, and to Luke Gosling, the local MP. But thank you in particular to Auntie B for welcoming us to country. I think many people, and I expect this is true of nobody here today, but many people in Australia, I think, sometimes forget just how generous it is to be welcomed to country. You think of all the things that could be said, and somebody says welcome. There is a generosity in that. And there's a similar generosity extended to the rest of Australia in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And I'm certainly proud to be part of a government that is hoping the rest of Australia responds with the same level of generosity and decency later this year. I'll be saying a little bit more later about the action plan and the work that the Directions Group has done. But let me, just in this moment, say something about why the International Decade of Indigenous Languages is so important. And if I can begin with a really brief story. I was Australia's Environment Minister 10 years ago, and I'd originally become politically active very passionately about an area of Australia known as the Daintree rainforest and wanting to see it protected. This is when I was in my teens. And so when I became Environment Minister, I thought, I want to go there. I want to go to the Daintree rainforest. I want to meet the traditional owners of the wet tropics. And I was shocked because the traditional owners didn't have the same sense of celebration of that decision in the 1980s. And I asked why. And they said, well, you protected it for environmental values, but not cultural values. How do you separate them? And in that moment, I think I started to get a glimpse of understanding why language is so important. Because the traditional owners of the wet tropics, they said to me, you keep trying to separate things. This bit's environment, this bit's language, this bit's culture, this bit's music. It's all connected. You can't protect the country without protecting language. You can't protect culture without protecting language and song and dance and art and story. They're all the same story. And out of that, I think if there's one second thought that I'd give for the decade we're about to embark on around the world, and obviously it's not simply what we're launching here relevant to all the First Nations of Australia, to all the elders, to all the ancestors, but indeed for the elders and ancestors of First Nations around the world, many of whom are represented here right now, with one very simple concept. At its heart, there is no such thing as translation. If you do the exercise of taking some of the lyrics of one of your favourite songs and picking a few languages on Google Translate and then eventually translate them back to the beginning, and you end up with completely different words. Because language doesn't have another language as its reference point. Language has country as its reference point. It has culture as its reference point. It has story. It has heritage. And in every language, there are words for which there is no other word in any other language. And for those emotions, ideas, concepts to forever live on this planet, language must live there too. When the United Nations made a decision for a decade for Indigenous languages, they made the same decision that Australia made when we adopted number 16, target 16 in our Closing the Gap targets. And that is that the decline that we have seen year after year after year must end, and it must be replaced with an increase in First Nations languages around the world being spoken, being lived, growing and thriving. It's a decision of the world, it's a decision that Australia is here to celebrate, and it is a change that will alter what it is to live in communities throughout the world when the language, the heritage that carries back to the first sunrise is something that we know will live there forever. That's the mission, that's the target, and that's why we're here today.